In the latest Knives Out film, there's a particular gag that I really enjoyed, though mild spoilers ahead. The character of Cy, a failing political influencer, is talking to Monsignor Wicks, a controversial church leader who acts as the central focus of tensions in the film. Filling his head with grand ambitions, Cy tells Wicks that with his charisma and cult of personality, Cy could build his brand and eventually even make him president. Then he ends the thought by saying this:
"Together we can build a real empire. As father and son."
Like in Star Wars?
Yeah, exactly, like the rebels.
The joke, of course, is that Cy is completely misreading Star Wars. Despite making a direct allusion to a father and son ruling the galaxy, thereby invoking the same sentiment as Darth Vader, he still views himself as being like the rebels. He's too self-involved to realize how he is and should be perceived. Now, some jokes like this are caricatures of real people, meant to exaggerate a type of guy that you'd never really meet. But in this case, I'm pretty sure it's based on something very real. In August 2024, in the build-up to the US election, Elon Musk tweeted this image. It reads, "You watched the Hunger Games and sided with the Resistance. You watched Star Wars and sided with the Resistance, The Matrix, Divergent, V for Vendetta, and sided with the Resistance. When it's fiction, you understand. Yet you refuse to see it when it's the reality you're living in. Wild." Considering the second Knives Out film features a character who is a direct parody of Elon Musk, I think it's safe to say that writer and director Rian Johnson knew exactly what he was poking fun at with that side joke. Now, regardless of your political affiliation, you have to say that Elon Musk is right. People don't understand the message or point of most fictional stories, and there's no better proof of that point than Elon Musk himself. The idea that the world's richest man would be a part of a resistance to any status quo is just, on its very surface, laughable. But of course, it's doubly laughable when you understand even the slightest amount about these works. Let's stick to Star Wars. Creator George Lucas has been very explicit about what his film was a message against. In this interview with fellow filmmaking legend James Cameron, George Lucas explicitly talks about how Star Wars was a message against American imperialism.
You did something very interesting with Star Wars, if you think about it. The good guys are the rebels. They're using asymmetric warfare against a highly organized empire. I think we call those guys terrorists. We call them Mujahideen, we call them Al-Qaeda.
When I did it, they were Viet Cong.
Exactly.
Lucas goes on in that interview to talk about how it was an anti-colonial message that was meant to attack the American establishment and populism as a whole. Cameron then follows this up by saying that there's a line in the film that he loves about how this is how liberty dies. And Lucas replies, "We're in the middle of it right now." This interview is from 2018, by the way, in the middle of the Trump presidency, in case you're wondering what Lucas was referring to. So returning to Elon Musk, it's doubly funny but also doubly fascinating to look at his tweet again. Remember that at the time of sending that tweet, Elon Musk was a highly visible figure of the Trump campaign and would go on to serve in his cabinet. So here's a guy citing a piece of fiction that is explicitly positioned against him and somehow trying to scold other people for not getting it. And more incredibly still, he criticizes them for not being able to apply the lessons of fiction into the real world. That somehow a person can watch Star Wars and root for the rebels in that world, but not in their own lives. So mind-boggling bewilderment aside, I think this is actually a perfect, hilarious, and incredibly relevant example of something that is a very real phenomenon I want to talk to you about. People do not understand fiction. Or more specifically, they do not seem to understand the point of fiction or the messages and critiques it can offer back to the real world. Despite chastising other people for it, Elon Musk clearly doesn't understand what Star Wars is about. And this is where we'll talk about reason number one why I think people don't understand fiction, because nobody likes to think they're the bad guys in their own story. In the mind of someone like Elon Musk, Star Wars is good. It's a great set of films and, more importantly, a huge cornerstone of modern culture. Therefore, the heroes in Star Wars are good and we like them. So I must be like the good guys too, goes the logic. I surely can't be like the bad guys, the Empire, even though, remember, they were explicitly written as an allegory for the imperial American establishment, which, despite being born in South Africa, Elon Musk is very much a part of and a huge player in. So in Musk's mind, people he doesn't like are the Empire. That doesn't have to be a correlation between what he's doing and what the rebels did or didn't do in Star Wars. It's as simple as, my enemies are bad like the bad guys in the film I like, and I am good like the good guys in the film I like. Now, I think it's totally okay to watch a piece of fiction and not agree with the message being given to us. To say, yeah, there were some nice things in that movie, but overall, I didn't really agree with what it was trying to say about the world or human nature. In fact, I wish it's a thing more people did. But it's another thing entirely to just warp what you're watching to fit whatever your worldview is. It's delusional. And of course, Musk isn't the only person to engage in this kind of delusion. Not everyone has the kind of power and influence to do things more reminiscent of the Empire than of the rebels, like he does. But plenty of other people support those kind of actions and still believe themselves to be the good guys. The sort of people Luke and Leia would happily cheer on. So what's behind this? Fascinated by that, I decided to look into the science of delusion. In my research, I came across this really interesting book by psychologist Stuart Vyse called The Uses of Delusion: Why It's Not Always Rational to Be Rational. It talks about how, actually, delusion has many benefits in our lives. When we think of the word delusion, we tend to think of it as a purely negative thing. If you said someone was delusional, you'd more than likely be insulting them or even questioning their psychological soundness. But actually, we know intuitively that we all keep some harmless delusions in our own lives. One of the most well-known examples of this is called the Lake Wobegon effect, which is the fact that most of us overestimate our abilities. In a famous 1980 study, 87.5% of Americans said they were above average drivers with respect to safety. And this effect has been replicated in other countries with only slightly less stark results. Of course, if nearly 90% of people are above average, well, that just doesn't add up. But it turns out that having these delusions is actually healthy. We need a certain level of delusion in our lives to function. Think of the fact that most small businesses fail, or how nearly 50% of marriages in the UK and US end in divorce, and even higher in some other countries. And yet people continue to start businesses and get married, and we wouldn't want them to stop doing either of those things. Or on a more emotional level, think of the white lies we use to cope. After a bad breakup or the loss of a loved one, we might tell ourselves that that person's not really gone, or that they might come back someday. In the immediate aftermath of such an event, it's easier to view the world this way, at least temporarily, rather than try and deal with the cold, harsh truth of your own solitude. And the research Vyse cites in his book shows that delusional people are actually happier, up to a point. When asked to view their own performance in a specific test, research found that people who were moderately depressed were incredibly accurate when assessing themselves, whereas the non-depressed people vastly overestimated their own competence. So all of this is to say that some level of delusion is healthy in our lives. And I think that's what's happening here. Someone like Elon Musk would either become depressed or be forced to rethink his entire worldview if he actually had to deal with the reality that the media he loves consuming is depicting him as the bad guy. So rather than realize that he's actually rooting for characters in the fictional world that he would hate in the real world, he just gives himself a delusion that he's actually the good guy in the story. He's like the rebels, not like the Empire, and a delusion like this helps him cope with the life he lives and the beliefs he holds. But I don't think delusion is the only explanation for why people don't understand fiction. Maybe that applies to someone like Elon Musk, who is too deep in the swamp to pull out now. But it doesn't apply to the many people who support people like him and yet root for the exact opposite in the media they adore and aspire to. This is where I think another phenomenon is perhaps a better explainer, that people let certain terms and buzzwords cloud their judgment. Another big reason why people struggle to marry the ideas they love in fiction with the ideas they support in the real world is because the labels and terminology we often use get mixed up with all kinds of baggage and confusion. The best example of this that I can think of comes from my own life. Not too long ago, I put out a video on Uncle Iroh from the show Avatar: The Last Airbender, which is one of my favorite pieces of media. Now don't worry, you don't need to have watched the show, though you really should. I will fill you in on the important details and, again, spoilers ahead. In the lore of the show, the world is divided into 4 nations which correspond to the 4 major elements: earth, fire, air, and water. A percentage of people from each nation are able to manipulate their corresponding element with a supernatural power called bending, except for the one avatar, a spiritual being who is reincarnated every generation and can bend all 4 elements while being tasked with keeping the balance. However, the world is thrown into chaos when the Fire Nation decide that they want to conquer the world and enact a genocide on the unsuspecting Air Nation, who are nomadic monks by nature, and wipe them all out. Before the attack, the Avatar, a child of the Air Nation, goes missing. The story then takes place 100 years later as the Avatar re-emerges, having been frozen in an iceberg all that time. I know, very dark for the premise of a kids show. Uncle Iroh is one of the most beloved, if not the most beloved character in the show. He's a sweet old man who was originally the crown prince of the Fire Nation, but he forsakes that title because he doesn't want to continue aiding the imperial conquest of the world. During the events of the show, he not once but twice betrays his country because he believes that the people of all four nations should live as equals and that the world can only operate when it's governed with harmony and empathy. After being branded a traitor and living as a refugee, he eventually leads a successful military uprising against the Fire Nation's colonial occupation of the Earth Nation. This is all in between acting as a mentor and father figure to the new crown prince of the Fire Nation, his nephew Zuko, who he eventually counsels to see the morally just path of forsaking the fascist Fire Nation legacy and embracing a new era of peace and equality. Now, during my video on Uncle Iroh, I used a term in passing to describe him that many people didn't like. I called him woke. In what was really just an offhanded statement from me, I referred to him as the sweet, woke Iroh we know and love. Later, I was surprised to see that several people in the comments were upset by this description. They were livid that I referred to a character they like, Uncle Iroh, as woke. They protested vehemently that Uncle Iroh wasn't woke, and why would I say that? This is where I think certain words cloud people's judgment when it comes to uniting the ideas they see in fiction and in real life. When I referred to Iroh as woke, I was using the term in the way it was originally coined. At its conception, the term woke was used to say that someone was aware of systemic injustice in the world, particularly racial injustice. You'll hear this in the famous Childish Gambino song Redbone, where the refrain is to stay woke, as in to stay aware. As someone who grew up in the 90s listening to a ton of hip-hop music, this was a term I encountered all the time. But of course nowadays, especially in America, the term woke has taken on a slightly different meaning. Even living in the UK, I understand this because ultimately American politics plays out more visibly than the politics of any other country in the world. We all know what's happening there because our social media and regular media is flooded with information about it. It also impacts us directly in some ways, and the trends that emerge in American politics tend to follow soon after in the UK. Nowadays, the term woke is essentially used as a pejorative term to describe anyone who is politically on the left and seen as too concerned with social injustice to the point of being annoying. Now, the thing about Uncle Iroh is, you can call him whatever term you want to. I don't particularly care. But it's also obvious what his political ideology would be if you were to transport it into the real world. This is a guy who is a race traitor to the dominant global superpower, even though he's part of its nobility. He rejects a colonial empire in favor of helping poor, disenfranchised, brown-skinned people. He champions a life spent drinking tea, making art, playing board games, and pondering philosophy. He lives as a refugee and settles as an immigrant. He's an animal conservationist who saves a species from going extinct, even at the cost of his own reputation. What would you call this guy in the real world? Call him woke, call him a leftist, call him liberal? It really doesn't matter to me. But let me just put it this way. He's not someone who's going to support Elon Musk. And more importantly, he's not going to share a worldview with the people who were angry at him being called woke. For the people who were upset in my comments, their logic is really simple. To them, the term woke simply means people I don't like. Or more accurately, they've just been told to think that it's a synonym for bad. So if woke equals bad, Uncle Iroh cannot be woke because I like Uncle Iroh. Therefore, Uncle Iroh is not woke because he is not bad, he is good. But put a character like Uncle Iroh in the real world, and there's no way that large sections of the American media would not call him woke. And I can guarantee they would loathe him. They would demonize him as the absolute #1 enemy of the state, in the same way the Fire Nation does in the show. So to those people I ask, is this label really bad? Or are you letting the label distract you from the meaning behind it? Because one of the great things about fiction is that it does create distance to allow us to see things objectively. Especially when it comes to politics, it can be so hard to have any objectivity. We have our families, our neighborhoods, our social classes, and all of these groups can have their political allegiances firmly set. Some people will proudly declare that their entire bloodlines have voted one way particularly for generations. And to further fuel that, those allegiances will usually come with a particular method for sourcing your information. A specific newspaper, a specific TV channel, a specific website. Vehicles for information which are almost never objective if there's such a thing left, and almost always with an agenda, feeding you a certain narrative about the world. It can be really hard to see through that cloud, sometimes impossible if you don't actually have something external to help you break out of it. But in fiction, all of that goes away. It's a different world with a different rule set, so we're able to see things in an objective way. Right and wrong, good and bad, we can judge each of these things on their own merit, on each individual case that we see, rather than having our judgment be pre-decided by our previous allegiances. Which is why it's doubly upsetting that people can't then watch something in fiction and see that the things they're being told to believe are not the same as what they actually feel when they're witnessing it happening. If you watch a show like Avatar: The Last Airbender, and you see a character like Uncle Iroh who is sensitive, empathetic, who puts the good of others above his own, who believes in equality, in fairness, who rejects ideas like race superiority, military conquest, genocide, hatred, discrimination, aggression. If you see a guy like this and think, he's amazing, he's the father I wish I had, he's the kind of person I want to be like, which are all other things people said in the comments to that video, then why is it that you don't feel that way when those same values are applied to the real world? Why is it that when he's a fictional person, he's great, but if this same character was a real person, he's the devil, he's bad, he's woke? In fact, so much of popular Hollywood media is full of characters and messages that are so at odds with what people will state their values are. So many movies like Star Wars mentioned earlier are about plucky idealists who are being pushed under the thumb, fighting against greedy overlords or some singular authoritarian figure who wants to conquer the world for selfish gain. Even Elon Musk could recognize that in this tweet of his, even if he came to a bizarre lesson from it. TV shows and films are filled with protagonists who are soft and empathetic and act in the good of the collective over the individual, usually at their own personal cost. And yet, people don't seem to connect the dots of what they admire in fiction and what they believe in reality. It's so strange that people can watch a film like Lord of the Rings, a trilogy about people from disparate racial backgrounds coming together to fight tyranny, and still be mad then when a black person is cast in the role of an elf. That actually takes me to the next reason why I think people don't understand fiction. They take it too literally. There's a brilliant video by the YouTuber Dan Olson, also known as Folding Ideas. In this video, Olson describes an argument method he terms the Thermian argument. It's not a long video, so I highly recommend you go watch it, but to sum it up quickly, it's a method of defending a piece of fiction from criticism or change based on in-world explanations. So for example, viewers might question why a female character in a particular anime is dressed so scantily and gratuitously, to which a defender would reply, well, you see, her powers require her to be wearing almost no clothes for it to be effective. This argument ignores the fact that some creator somewhere gave this character those specific powers and designed the specific parameters of how they work. So defending it on the grounds of the in-world logic of her powers doesn't hold up. The original criticism of the outfit still stands because it's still a criticism of the decision from the creators of the show to make things that way. You're seeing images on screen of Momo from My Hero Academia, who's a great example of such a discussion. Her powers allow her to create inanimate objects from her body. But even if we accept that as her given power, why does the stuff have to come out from between her cleavage? You can hear more about that discussion in this fantastic video exploring the sexism in My Hero Academia. Now, the reason this is known as the Thermian argument is because the name is inspired by the race of people in Galaxy Quest, the Thermians, who do not understand the concept of fiction. All texts in their mind are works of historical documentation. As I mentioned, there is a tendency amongst people to defend pieces of fiction or changes to a piece of fiction on the grounds of that's just how it was written in the original. In the case of Lord of the Rings, which I mentioned, there was controversy around the casting of a black man as an elf and more diverse characters in general in the TV spin-off Rings of Power. People felt that it was A, not accurate to the original work, and B, not accurate to historical reality. But this line of thinking fails on so many grounds. Firstly, there's just a straight-up misinformation that there haven't been black people living freely in Europe for hundreds of years, which there has been. For those interested, I recommend a book called Black Tudors, which explains the rich history of black people emigrating and living freely within the UK during the Tudor period, which began in the 1400s, and there's even evidence that there were black people living freely in the UK as far back as the 1st century AD. So the idea that there couldn't be a dark-skinned character in Europe at the same time they were waging warfare with swords and arrows is just false. But even if that wasn't the case, the author's vision is always compromised in the adaptation from one piece of media into another. Characters are changed, story arcs modified if not cut altogether, and casting choices are never fully faithful, even with the issue of race aside. We allow a book that's over 1,000 pages long to be adapted into movies which, extended edition or not, don't even run for a combined 20 hours, while the audiobook alone runs for 50 plus hours. There are plenty of changes we accept and even praise when an adaptation is done right, but to draw the line at diverse casting or tone down bigotry is to say that misogyny and racism are the essence of the piece, that they are somehow central to enjoying the story, at which point you're just telling on yourself. Again, how people can watch a film with hobbits and elves and dragons and say, "I draw the line at black people," is hilarious. Or that they should watch the film and think racism is good is the message they should take away. But the justification of historical accuracy is one of those areas where the Thermian argument just always falls apart. When women wear boob armor over their chest, which is highly impractical and was never historically accurate, it's written off as just a fantasy world. When you question why there can't be more empowered women in that world, they'll say it's about historical accuracy. The goalposts are always moved. But the reason I'm going on what some might view as a lengthy tangent is this. There's a set of people who take fiction far too literally. They are like the Thermians of Galaxy Quest in that they cannot seem to recognize that fiction is not something that exists in an immutable realm of its own, but rather it is, and always will be, a reflection on our world and reality. All art, and especially great art, will try to say something about our world, about humanity, about our nature, about how we conduct ourselves. If you watch fiction and think that its messages only apply to the fictional world, then you're not just mistaken, but you're missing out. When art truly resonates with us, it elevates it to a whole new level. And I think somewhere deep down, everyone understands this intuitively, even those who fail to understand it consciously. When we watch our favorite TV show or movie, we laugh and cry and cheer for the characters because we can empathize with them, or see some version of our lives in theirs. Whether they remind us of ourselves or a friend or a loved one or even someone we dislike, we feel emotions when watching fiction because we understand the feelings being depicted on screen. We understand the pain the main character is going through and cry with them. Or we can imagine the elation they would feel for a certain victory and we feel happy for them. Fiction is so powerful precisely because it relates back to our lives, not because it exists in some vacuum we could never relate to. So it's equally important to understand that fiction was the creation of someone. It was a contrived piece of work with rules that can be altered should we wish to adapt it. But also, that those rules, decisions, and stories tell us something about our own nature and our own reality. Sure, there are some works which we watch just to turn off our brains, but that's not most media, and that's certainly never the stuff that really sticks with or resonates with us. Which brings me to the final point I want to make for why I think people don't understand fiction. So far, we've discussed people not wanting to view themselves as the bad guys, associating the wrong things with the wrong terms, and also how people sometimes separate fiction from reality as if it has its own internal rule sets and no relation back to the real world. But there's another category of fiction misunderstanding that completes our little melange. Some people believe that fiction doesn't mean anything at all. By and large, when I think about social media, I'm reminded of the worst of humanity. But once a month or so, it delivers these beautiful moments of unity where it feels like all of society comes together to do something wholesome or just plain hilarious. One of my favorite recent examples came as a consequence of this tweet by Sharon Davies, one of those micro-celebrities that transitions their career into being an online agitator. She writes, "Making my way through all the Indiana Jones movies on Netflix, remembering the days when movies and movie stars were fabulous message-free entertainment and escapism. This is when the internet came together in one of its beautiful moments to dunk on her repeatedly. People replied with a clip of Indiana Jones talking about how much he hates Nazis, or the iconic image of Harrison Ford mid-winding up a punch against a Nazi officer. Now it would be fun to dunk on just this specific individual, but what she's highlighting is actually a really common and important trend that you see online. People thinking that art is inherently apolitical. That is to say, it doesn't mean anything or isn't trying to say anything. To this set of people, art is only political if it is A, explicitly talking about politics, and B, if there's some diverse casting for the characters that then make it somehow pushing a woke agenda. There's that word again. But while I'm hardly the first to say it, it needs to be said anyways that all art is political, whether it wants to be or not. Even in specifically setting out to be apolitical, you're making a political statement. I think some people get confused because they think that the word political is limited to something that relates to established electoral parties or to methods of government. But that's just the profession of politics. But because how we govern the world is so fundamental to how different people experience it and what they can and can't do, just about everything in the world has some political consequence or is downstream of some political decision. Therefore, everything is political. Let's say you're a writer and you want to create a movie. If there's a man and woman in your film, the gender dynamics of the society you're a product of and the society you depict will have some sort of meaning. Even if it's a rom-com and you argue that the two characters are absolutely equal, how they court each other would say something about dating norms, for example. How you present their personalities would say something about stereotypes about men and women, and would almost certainly be influenced by the preconceptions you have about the role of men and women in society. For example, a common rom-com trope is to have an independent, strong-willed woman who is rather uptight be paired with a more carefree man. That's because in the Western world, there's an association that women who are more driven and vocal are somehow out of touch with their femininity and emotions. So the usual journey women like this follow in a rom-com is to learn to soften and become more gentle as a consequence of their interactions with their love interest. If you write a film with only men or only women, that too would be a political choice. Your decision, whether conscious or subconscious, to leave out one set of people has an impact on the story and on your depictions of the world. The same goes for the choices you make in terms of race, sexuality, and so forth. Now that doesn't mean that any of this is inherently bad, and that's where I think some people get confused. No reasonable person would criticize you for a legitimate choice to leave some set of people out, and if you get granular enough, there will always be some demographic you've not represented on screen. If you said, I want to tell a story about the struggle of two brothers trying to deal with the absence of a father figure in their life, no reasonable person would be mad at you for not spending enough time talking about women's issues. But of course, your story would still be political for what it's trying to say about men in our society, about the role of fathers, about how men interact and bond with each other, and so on. So returning to that tweet, it's once again obvious on the very surface of the statement that it's just wrong. Not just because Indiana Jones is so clearly a film about how much Nazis suck, but because it posits that there was ever this golden time when films and movie stars were message-free. To suggest so is to either reveal that A, you're so clouded by nostalgia that you long for the days when you were a child who didn't comprehend the deeper meanings you were being shown, B, that you still think like a child and cannot understand the very obvious messages in front of you, or C, that you're willfully ignoring political messages like Nazis are bad when it suits you to do so, probably because you don't want to admit that a statement like fascism is bad might implicate your own political beliefs and call them into question. Now I could go into a whole tangent about media literacy as a concept, about how there's lots of things about the consumption of media itself that people don't understand. For example, a common mistake people make is that they assume that the main character is always a good guy, even when the point of the work is to criticize them. A good example would be Breaking Bad, whose protagonist Walter White is supposed to be a bad person, and yet many people uncritically root for him. But that is beyond the scope of what I want to talk about today, because that's actually a different topic. And if you want to see a video like that, or if there's just a particular topic you'd like me to cover next, then I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. For now, I'll settle on these 4 major reasons why people don't understand fiction in the way I'm talking about today, which is to understand its messages and how to apply them to the real world. I'm not sure if these are comprehensive, but in my mind, the Venn diagram looks something like a combination of delusion born from cognitive dissonance, the over-reliance of labels to decide how you feel about an issue, the Thermian belief of treating fiction as reality, and the flawed belief that art is or can be apolitical. But that's what I think. What do you think? Did you understand my art, or are you too delusional to appreciate its beauty? Jokes aside, I just wanted to say thank you for clicking on this video and watching it all the way through to the end. Your view means an enormous amount to me, and I hope this video was enlightening or thought-provoking in some way. I was a little scared to even make this video since it's the most overtly political video on the channel, though, as we've established, there will always be a political slant to everything we do. I've always wanted this channel to be a place of positivity, not another place that's full of takedown videos and negativity. But at the end of the day, I really believe this to be an important issue that deserves more attention. Either way, I just want my content to be thoughtful and inspiring, whether that's emotionally or intellectually. So if you found that to be the case, then I'd really appreciate it if you'd consider supporting me directly. As you can see, this video contains no sponsors because I try not to rely on shady sponsors to fund my work. But that ethical choice means I take a huge financial hit in doing so. For me, I'd rather my work, if it can be funded entirely by engaged viewers like yourself. So if everyone watching this video donated even just $1, I'd most likely be set to make videos for a year. You can either leave a one-time donation via PayPal or a monthly or annual subscription on Patreon where I can offer rewards and updates for fans. There's also YouTube memberships on this channel. The links to all of this are in the video description, as are the links to my Discord server, where you can find like-minded media lovers to talk about movies, TV shows, books, games, and just about anything else you might like. And you can also find the link to my Twitch stream if you enjoy watching some chill gaming sessions. But for now, I'd just like to give a huge shout out to my current patrons who do the incredible job of supporting this channel and whose names you're seeing on screen right now. Thank you for watching this video. I hope to see you soon, and I hope you have a wonderful day.